This is Weekly Woman by Jubilance for PMS. Well, welcome, Nadia. We are so excited to have you on the podcast. Thank you so much for being on today.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, I just want to ask, where are you calling in from with this beautiful background?
I'm in Boulder, Colorado.
Oh, amazing.
Yeah.
That's such a lovely outdoorsy area.
Yeah, it's all new to me to be so nestled in the mountains. I'm very much a city girl, or at least have been so far in my life. And so trying out a new thing.
Oh my God, that's amazing. Did you just move there?
About a year ago. So
Okay.
it feels pretty fresh.
Oh, that's amazing. I know there are all those wonderful bike paths everywhere.
Oh
That's what I
yeah.
remember about Boulder.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Oh, that's awesome. Um, and so I was curious, so you've been all over the world, you've taught in many different places. But what you are known for is this class and this physical dancing called Embody. Can you
Mm-hmm.
tell our listeners about what that is?
Yes, I'd love to. So Embody was really created from me looking around the movement and dance spaces and feeling like there weren't a lot of places for women identifying folks to really be able to explore their internal experience and as a result their embodied expression in a place that didn't have structure and choreography and or going to the gym, or whenever we go to these dance classes or Pilates, there's always someone telling us what to do, which
Mm-hmm.
is not a bad thing. I mean, there's something great about the discipline of that and the physicality of that. But I was really looking for where do we have places as women where we can go and be in the feminine experience of being, of feeling, of receiving, and then also of expressing through our bodies. And there were a few sort of peripheral spaces where there was a lot of intuitive movement that was encouraged, but it often really pulled in a very particular subculture of people. And so, what I was wanting to do with Embody was to really bring it to everyone, anyone who identifies as a woman, anyone who wants to go in and explore different feminine experiences in our body, and to do so in a place that feels really safe to go into that internal experience.
Mm-hmm.
So that was sort of the intention behind it. And then the format itself, just to land people, because it's a new concept, is really one where we go into an hour, it's an hour class. And what you're doing is you are being guided by me or one of my trained teachers and to essentially start to move into the energy of pleasure, explore what your relationship to pleasure is. Then we move into exploring your relationship to power and then your relationship to play. And so it was these three different energies that I felt were often missing for a lot of women who were coming to me in my private coaching practice. They had some sort of skewed or distorted experience with one or all three of those. And so it was really a place for us to explore different archetypal energies in our bodies through the process of intuitive movement and dance. So you really go in and there's a level of, it's essentially what I like to call a moving meditation, a guided moving meditation. So I'm guiding you, or the facilitator is guiding you through the entire hour, but there's a level of freedom in what you're doing. I'm not telling you take 3 steps to the right, take 4 steps to the left, right? But instead, what I might be inviting you into is, noticing what it feels like to touch your own body, which we often forget to do, right? So it's just the simple thing of the pleasure of what does it feel like to just have your hand graze down a curve? What does it feel like to be receiving the warmth of your own touch? What starts to come up, right? We don't have a lot of time and space to really go into the experience of connecting to our bodies and what's happening on the inside.
Yeah, I think that's really fascinating because like you said with Pilates or with I don't know, yoga or something, they're just telling you okay, now go into downward dog, now go into what have you. But it's not about the aspect of your interaction with yourself. It's just about oh, how can I get this pose, or how can I stay balanced or breathe properly. But this interesting thing that you're creating about through intimacy and embodiment, which is how you approach coaching, is such a fascinating experience. It seems to be so fascinating and something that we all need. Of how do we go with pleasure, play, and power? How as women do we learn that this is like pleasurable and okay as well,
Yeah.
to feel these things and to feel our own selves?
Yeah. Yeah. And the thing is that there was a lot of, I saw three universal messages that a lot of women were struggling with, that I felt sort of were plastered on our bodies and making us rigid and contracted and not in our full essence, not in our full expression. And that was, one was around pleasure, one was obviously, one was around each of the words. And for pleasure, it was really about our sensuality and our pleasure being dangerous, right? So many of us go through that experience, unfortunately, where at some point in our lives we were shamed or shunned for being in our pleasure, or for emanating sensuality about us. We often also have a lot of interesting stuff around a power only coming from this place of dominance, where it feels like emotionality is a weakness. We have to hold back crying, right? You don't go to the office and cry. That doesn't look good. That's not professional, quote unquote.
Mm-hmm.
Right. But really, there is so much strength in our vulnerability and in our emotions and in our capacity to use our bodies to feel, to be. I mean, this is part of the human experience. And then with play, I noticed there was a lot of messaging around play being unproductive, right? Work hard, play later. When we were young, it was always like, finish your homework and then you get the reward, which has some sort of play involved. And so I found that a lot of women I was working with who became their own bosses still were really implementing, like there was such a deep unconscious message of like, well, I don't have time to play, but actually our creativity, our wonder, our curiosity, this childlike energy in us is actually a really important part of how we can gift the world as, women. And I mean, as humans in general, it's not just women, but since these are the people I'm working with. And so these three messages were really shutting us down and keeping us from being big and bold in our expression. And so the arc of the class where we move through pleasure, power, and play is really one to start to liberate your body and your consciousness from these messages that keep us small and silent. And so a lot of women experience not just a deeper connection to their body going through class, but they're like, whoa, I had no idea that there was this piece around play that was really challenging for me, and that it's actually hard for me to be silly and in awe and in wonder. And so they walk away and it's not even just about, oh, I feel so freaking good after class because I moved for an hour and I felt my feelings, but like, oh, wow, how does this play out in my life? Right. And that's where it becomes more of like a healing modality, because it's not just about the hour that you're in class. It's about taking that away and going, oh, wow, where does this show up in the rest of my life?
Wow. Yeah, I think that's so interesting because play, especially like you said, that women are like, maybe have a hard time with like finding that laughter or whatever. It seems to be something that it was the reward at the end of working hard, or like just that idea of work hard, play hard. You work first and then you play. But how you were saying that play can kind of push us into these like different ideas of like our feminine expression, but also it can help us in work, it can help us in life and in relating to other people. And so can you talk a little bit about how you got started in these ideas in coaching and being certified as an intimacy coach?
Yeah. So when I started off coaching, I actually started off as a holistic health coach. So I was certified in that, and I was simultaneously certified separately in sensual movement and facilitating sensual movement. So what started to happen organically within the first few years of my practice is I moved away from like, here's how you make a smoothie, back in the day, because the smoothies weren't even a thing when I first started health coaching, right? And so it was like, you have to teach people how to do that. So I started to bring in the piece around health coaching and the piece around sensuality uh, together, because what I noticed was my clients were asking, they were sort of externalizing uh, the information. Like they were looking outward to see what would support their body. And I was coaching them to go inward. I was saying what your
Mm.
body, the diet, the lifestyle, the support that you need is going to be different for each person. And so I can't tell you if you should be paleo or vegan. Like that's not,
Mhm.
And so it moved. And then over time, the conversation moved more and more into just dropping deeper into your body, right? And just getting more connected to the feminine desires that you have, and getting more intimate with your body. And because when we are more intimate with ourselves, with our bodies, with our inner landscape, we can dance and interact with the outside world from a much more authentic and powerful place, because we know ourselves. We've got ourselves. We know how to take care of ourselves. And so it
Mhm.
always starts with an inner monologue, and then we move out into dialogue. Then we move out into what I like to call the dance, right? It's like the dance with a partner. So it's like the relational intimacy, a dance with your mission in the world, a dance with the environment and the world as a whole. So like all of these pieces start with understanding, well, what's true for me and how can I take care of myself?
Mhm. Yeah, that's a very interesting idea about this inner monologue and then moving into the dancing part. How do you get people to shut off the internal monologue that's nervous or scared or hasn't tried this, what you call erotic movement
Yeah.
before?
Yeah. Great question. That everyone wants to know the answer to this one, right? Because we've got like our little mental chatter, which we all have.
Mhm.
Part of why I do this work is because I know people don't think it, but I'm a very, like, naturally by default, a very intellectual, mental, heady person.
Mm.
I was like in New York City for so many years. Like I'm very like that archetype of a human. And yet what embodiment brought to me was a sense of like dropping down and in, getting grounded. And so the question is how, right?
Yes.
Here's the deal. Sensation has no story. I say this over and over again in my work. When we drop into our senses, the five senses, right? Taste, touch, our sense of sound, sight, like all of that, when we are fully in the presence of just feeling, oh, what does it feel like? Literally for my finger to graze across my chest. When I take a deep breath in, what am I smelling in the air around me? Or what am I desiring to smell?
Mhm.
So on and so forth, right? Like if we use that for all five senses, what happens is in the moment that you are feeling the sensation, you can't simultaneously have a story about whatever's going on. And that's what mental chatter is. So the
Mhm.
simplest way to get out of your own head and all the stories is to drop into your sensation. And so when I talk about sensuality, I know often in pop culture, we sort of, there's a lot of overlap of sensuality and sexuality. But to
Mhm.
clarify, when we're talking about sensuality and the sensual body, we're just talking about dropping into your five senses. So the way
Oh.
that I get people into their bodies is by truly having them start to pay attention to, what are you tasting? What are you touching? How are you feeling in the receptivity of your own touch? What colors are you seeing around you or in the darkness behind your eyelids if your eyes are closed? What
Mhm.
textures, what notes in the song are starting to like tickle your earlobes here, right? Like the second you start to go into that exploration and that curiosity, you're not thinking like, oh man, I'm just the worst at getting in my body. And I think it's because when I was 4, this happened, right? We don't, in that moment, you can't have both thoughts.
Wow. Yeah, that's so interesting. I wouldn't have thought about that, but just like having all of those senses, and thank you for explaining sensuality as dropping into those senses. It feels like it is so sexualized in our culture of like the sensual, the sexual, the erotic. That's so fascinating. So can you talk a little bit about what you want your clients to feel at the end of this hour session? What
Mm.
are they taking away from this?
They often, so what I've heard from them is they feel more expansive, they
Mm.
feel more grounded, they feel more confident because they've touched into their power. They feel more sensual, obviously, because they've dropped into their senses. And they often feel like cleansed. Like they always say that they just feel like, because there's so much release in class. There's a wave, we move up, it gets louder and bigger in our expression. And I always give people a chance to go into the chaos, into the tantrum, into the anger. This is a piece that's not often spoken about, or there aren't enough spaces. Now I know in the last like 5 years, there's been quite a trend of, what are those things called? Like, not anger rooms, but there's like, there are these spaces where you can literally go, like you pay, you walk
to
in and
smash things.
yeah, to smash things.
Yeah.
I don't know what the official names are, but like something like anger rooms and things like that. And yeah, you get to go smash things. And just like, think about why there's a demand for that, because there's not enough spaces where we get to just move through the entire range of our emotions. And the truth is, some of our emotions are more aggressive. Some of our emotions are angrier, are sadder, are more chaotic. And if we have a safe space to actually release that energy, which is often just, hormones. Like, I mean, right now I'm in the time in my cycle where it's like my testosterone is the highest. I feel how I'm more aggressive. Like, I'm like, oh, it's literally my personality has just shifted this week. Because I just get a little bit more annoyed when I'm driving, and there's just like funny things that happen that I'm like, oh, this is so interesting. Is this what it's like to be a man? And so I think that we need just spaces to be able to express our full range. So I feel like I went a little bit on a tangent, but to pull it back in, women will feel all those things because they've had a chance to be with their truth. And when they're with their truth and they're expressing their truth, whatever that truth may be that day, it could be I'm ecstatic and I'm so joyful, or it could be like I'm grieving something really deep. And this space allows for the full range. And so whatever's coming up for you, you get to express it. And there's always pleasure on the other side. There's always catharsis and release and cleansing and a feeling of coming back to your center. That's why people say expansion, grounded, because all of that is about you getting back into the center of your being and your power.
Wow, that does sound absolutely wonderful. I want to feel that cleansing, the catharsis.
And the best part is, it's like, it's just on the outside, it presents like a really great dance party. You know what I mean? Like, we're all just dancing in a room. But there's so much more happening that is very intentionally placed. There's so many layers in the experience that are there. Keeping in mind a lot of, trauma work, and just how somatics and sort of the bottom up approach to therapy, where we start with the body and move into the mind instead of go from the mind and try to go down into the body. So there's a lot of intentional elements in the class, though we're ultimately just dancing and moving.
Yeah. So something that we always ask on this podcast, and you've kind of touched on what you think like feminism and the role of like people who identify as women. But what is your definition at this current moment of womanhood?
Wow, this is like a podcast episode in itself.
Oh, yeah.
We are in such an interesting time where I'm still in the exploration. I'm still trying to understand, what does it mean to be a woman? How do we define womanhood? And where I've come to as of today, which may continue to change because it's an exploration, is that there's actually quite a few layers. So there's the internal experience of, do I feel like a woman? Do I identify as a woman? Right. So it's very much just what's going on inside. Then there's the external experience, or the social experience of being viewed as a woman. So it's sort of the outside in, right? So for those of us who are in a female body, we are going to have a certain socialized experience and projections put on us, right? And certain guidelines and ways that we're supposed to be based on if we're in a female body, but we may not identify as a woman, right? So it's like an interesting dance of these two that we're starting to try to really peel apart, and we're all collectively in that discussion. And then there's also the energetic layer, which is more about feminine and masculine, where it's less about the, you know, the gender or the body we're in, and it's more about like, do I generally feel like a feminine being, irrespective of, you know, the body I'm in, or even how I identify? Because I could identify as a man who very much has a lot of feminine, you know, essence in them. And what's femininity? Femininity is about receptivity, about expression. It's about holistic we thinking. There's a lot of, you know, beautiful things that connect us. There's a connectivity in the feminine energy. The masculine is like holding and going from point A to point B. It's like it's more structured. It's more like a tree. It's more like an arrow. And those are just energies that we all have a combo of, and the ratio is just, you know, a little bit different. But then there's the socialized experience of being a woman that also brings in a lot of pain, a lot of challenge. And so we're working with both in Embody and in my coaching practice, where it's like, okay, we're trying to remove some of the contraction that's come from the socialized experience of being a woman, right? Walking around, like I get so many clients who are like, okay, when I first got breasts, or when I started to emanate more sensuality, like my whole entire experience of who I am changed, right? So we're working with these things. We're working with like, what is it like to be a woman who is on her cycle and is going to have more emotional experiences in the office, right? So we have all these things that are very socialized. And then we also have like, I just want to be in the feminine exploration of my heart. I want to feel connectivity. I want to radiate my experience, you know, my expression and my truth. So it's like a little bit of all those things. I know it's not a very, we're not in a, I think we're just in a more nuanced phase of history where it's like really interesting to understand all the intersection of all these places.
Yeah, I definitely agree. And it could be a whole podcast episode, but that's why I love asking that question, because everyone has a very, very different answer. Then of course we would, like maybe 50 years ago, 100 years ago. Like you said, we're in a very nuanced point in history, and taking in all of those definitions that you created. I love the idea of the holistic we as feminism, of taking in this more holistic view of the collective, as opposed to the straight shot arrow that you're saying of like more masculine energy, which is so fascinating. And Nadia, what is next for you? What is next for your company? What is next for Embody? Can you talk a little bit about that?
If only I knew. So part of me deepening into a lot of my feminine energy has been a releasing of control and doing leadership and running my own business in a more feminine way, which often means that, you know, I used to have like every quarter, here are goals, here's what we're doing, like, and guess what? It never went that way anyways. And so now it's a lot more of a feeling, of an energy that I drop into, of prayer and ritual that I bring into my spaces, into my workday, and where I'm constantly asking to be led by, you know, the divine nudges that come in, and then to be the human executor of that, to be the messenger, to be like, all right, well, here are the funnels I need to create, and here's the what page do I need to do, and here's, you know, and all the like stuff that has to happen. And so so that's sort of the general what's next. With that said, you know, I'm always running facilitator trainings. I think we're 8 or 9 rounds in. So I love teaching people how to facilitate in their own communities, because it's just such an important space to have. I want every single town, city to have a place where women can go and have that experience and to complement that to their yoga and their Pilates and to, everything else. So the facilitator training will never stop, I don't imagine. And there's nothing I love more than intimately coaching in a one-on-one setting. There's just a transformation that occurs that I don't see occurring in group programs, in digital courses, none of that. And there's a lot of rhetoric these days about, scaling and let's get to millions. And I never got into it for that. My number one goal, of course, I love some good money, right? I love more than anything seeing the transformation woman by woman and working with them in this beautiful, intimate container, which is so much of the work that we do is intimacy, right? So it would make sense that I wouldn't necessarily want to just be releasing courses to thousands of people. Yeah. So just chugging along, doing my work.
That's great. And Nadia, how can people find out about you? How can they take your course? How can they become certified, or how can they get your coaching?
Yeah. So just my full name, nadiamunla.com, NADIAMUNLA.com is my website. And then like on social media, I primarily hang out on Instagram. That's where you'll find me. And it's same thing. It's just at Nadia Munla. And I love hearing from you all. I love getting messages. I'm about to gear into doing a season 2 of my own podcast called The Edge. So that's another way people can find me, is just on Spotify or Apple Music, wherever, all the places. You just look up The Edge and my name and you'll get a whole season. And I love hearing from you guys, because what happens is then I do some solo episodes, and I love to take what my community has questions about and is curious about and just talk to you all about it. So yeah, those are the places you can find me.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Nadia. It's been such a pleasure to get to talk to you today.